Hare Krishna. Is my screen visible?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yes, visible Prabhu.
Okay. So we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Majnana Timrandasya Jnananjala Sanakale Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Yudapatakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavapcha Sri Rupam Sarjadam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Saudutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय So today we'll start chapter 11, the first canto. In the previous chapter we saw about Krishna's departure from Hastinapura after the war. So now this chapter Krishna has already arrived in Dwaraka. In the last verse of chapter 10, we saw how Krishna it was described that Krishna would stop his travel in the evening to perform all the required rites and rituals. So like that, Krishna continued to travel to Dwaraka. So the first verse of chapter 11, Suta Uvacha Anartan Sa Upavrajya Swardan Janapadan Swakan Dadma Daravaram Tesham Vishadam Samayaniva Suta Uvacha Anartan Sa Upavrajya Swardan Janapadan Swakan Dadma Daravaram Tesham Vishadam Samayaniva Suta Uvacha Anartan Saupavrajya Sridan Janapadan Swakan Datmau Daravaram Tesham Vishadam Shamayanivaha Suta Uvacha Anartan Saupavrajya Sridan Janapadan Swakan Datmau Daravaram Tesham Vishadam Shamayanivaha. Anyone want to try?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Sutta Uvacha Anartan Sa Upavrajya Svirdan Janapadan Swagan Datmaudaravaram Shadam Shamayan Iva.
Very good, Mataji. Thanks. Anyone else?
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Sutta Uvacha Anardam Sa Upavajra Ya Swaratana Janapada Padam Swakam Dadmau Naravaram Tesam Vishadam Samambayam Ya.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Okay, we'll continue with the translation. Synonyms. Sutta Uvacha. Sutta Goswami said, Anartan, the country known as Anartan, Dwaraka, Sa, he, Upavrajya, reaching the border of Shraddhan, most prosperous, Janapadan, city, Swakan, his own, Dadmau, sounded, Daravaram, the auspicious consul, Panchajanya, Tesham of them, Vishadam, dejection, Shamayan, pacifying, Iva, seemingly. Translation. Sutta Goswami said, upon reaching the border of his most prosperous metropolis, known as the country of the Anarthas, Dwaraka, the Lord sounded his auspicious conch-shell, heralding his arrival and apparently pacifying the dejection of the inhabitants. So here it is stated that upon arriving in Dwaraka, Lord Krishna sounded his conch-shell, Panchajanya, and even in Gita, chapter 1, verse 15, there's a mention of this transcendental conch-shell. Panchajanyam Rishikesho Devadatam Dhananjaya Poundam Dadmau Mahashankam Bhima Karma Rikodra. So in verse 15 and 16, the conch shells, the names of the conch shells used by Krishna and the Pandavas are all mentioned in verses 15 and 16 of Gita in chapter 1. So Panchajanya is described in those verses. The beloved Lord was away from his own prosperous metropolis of Dwaraka for a considerably long period because of the battle of Kurukshetra, and thus all the inhabitants were overcome with melancholia due to the separation. When the Lord descends to the earth, his eternal associates also come with him, just as the entourage of a king accompanies him. So even in Bhagavatam, Canto 11, there's a verse which describes the appearance of Lord Chaitanya. As we know, in all the scriptures, all the incarnations of Krishna are mentioned like a prediction saying that the Lord will appear in these particular yugas, and there are descriptions about how about his appearance. So similarly, even about Lord Chaitanya's appearance, it is also mentioned in Canto 11 of Bhagavatam. So in that verse, it is mentioned that he will appear with his associates. So as we know, the associates of Lord Chaitanya, the Panchatattwas, Panchatattwas, including Lord Chaitanya. So even when he appears, meaning the most recent appearance. So even in that appearance, he appeared with all his companies. So all these descriptions are always there in the scriptures. So apart from the 6 opulences, the Supreme Lord is also was also able to display his Vishwarupa Darshan, and the descriptions about when the Lord descends as an incarnation and how he appears with all his associates. Those descriptions are also mentioned in the scriptures. So it is there's no point in believing some so-called incarnations who are nothing but fake godmen. So if we study from the scriptures, we can clearly see how the Supreme Lord truly incarnates to this material world. So these are the criteria, like the Lord appears with his opulences, and the descriptions about his appearances are all there in the scriptures, and he is also able to display his Vishwarupa Darshan. Such associates of the Lord are eternally liberated souls, and they cannot bear the separation of the Lord, even for a moment, because of intense affection for the Lord. Thus, the inhabitants of the city of Dwaraka were in a mood of dejection, and expected the arrival of the Lord at any moment. So the heralding sound of the auspicious conch shell was very encouraging, and apparently the sound pacified their dejection. They were still more aspirant to see the Lord amongst themselves, and all of them became alert to receive him in the befitting manner. These are the signs of the spontaneous love of Godhead. So it was this type of love which made the residents, the inhabitants of Dwarka, to be able to receive the personal association of Lord Krishna. So in all the dhams like Vrindavan, Mathura, and Dwarka, all those inhabitants are certainly great exalted devotees, and that's why they became qualified to be able to enjoy the personal association of the Supreme Lord when he was present in this material world. And therefore, all these symptoms exhibited by the residents, not just in Dwarka, even in the residents of Vrindavan and Mathura, all these are spontaneous due to their unmotivated and unceasing devotion towards the Supreme Lord. That's why they were qualified to enjoy his personal association when he was present in the material world. Text 2. The white and fat bowl conch shell being gripped by the hand of Lord Krishna and sounded by him appeared to be reddened by the touch of his transcendental lips. It seemed that a white swan was playing in the stems of red lotus flowers. The redness of the white conch shell due to the lip touch of the Lord is a symbol of spiritual significance. The Lord is all spirit, and matter is ignorance of this spiritual existence. Factually, there's nothing like matter in spiritual enlightenment, and this spiritual enlightenment takes place at once by the contact of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. The Lord is present in every particle of all existence, and he can manifest his presence in anyone. By ardent love and devotional service to the Lord, or in other words, by spiritual contact with the Lord, everything becomes spiritually laden, like the conch shell in the grip of the Lord. And the Paramahamsa, or the supremely intelligent person, plays the part of the ducking swan in the water of spiritual bliss, eternally decorated by the lotus flower of the Lord's feet. So it is stated here that the Lord is all spirit, and matter is ignorance of this spiritual existence. So that's the reason why we are here in this material world. Though we are originally spirit souls, part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, we have been encased within this material body, and that is such is our degraded condition in this material world. But the Lord is all spirit, and the difference between us here in the material world and the Lord is that even when the Supreme Lord descends to this material world, he does not become contaminated by the influence of matter or the material energy, because he himself is the source of this material energy, which drives this entire material creation. So we have also seen the distinction between these different types of energies, like the material energy is known as Ekapada Vibhuti, 1/4 of the Lord's total energy, and the spiritual energy is known as Tripada Vibhuti, means 3/4 of the Lord's entire energy. However, he is the source for all these different types of energy. Like we ourselves, we are regarded as Tatashta Shakti, meaning marginal energy, because we are like in between. We are neither purely material and we are not even qualified to be fully spiritual, since we are contaminated by the influence of material nature. So we are like in between. We are known as the Tatashta Shakti or marginal energy. So these descriptions are also there in Gita 7.4, 7.5. However, but the the Supreme Lord does not get contaminated by this influence of material energy. And even when he appears in the material world, his appearance and his activities are all transcendental. So that is what the Supreme Lord says in Gita 4.9. Janma karma chame divyam em yoveti tatvata chatvadeyam punarjanma naitimameti so Arjuna. Those who know the appearance and activities, the transcendental appearance and activities of the Supreme Lord are qualified to go back to Godhead. Also, Lord Krishna says in Gita 9.11, Avajanati Mamuda, Manushim Tanu Ashritam, Parambhava Majananto, Mamabhuta Maheshwaram. Those who know the transcendental nature of the Lord's appearance and activities, they become qualified to go back to Godhead, to the spiritual world. On the contrary, those who do not understand that despite being blessed with the human form of life, so such foolish people will always stand to ridicule the Supreme Lord just because he appears in a human-like form. The transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord's body is such that there is no difference between his body and his soul. Like for us, there is a distinction between our material body and the spirit soul which is encased within. But for the Supreme Lord, there's no such thing like gross or subtle body. His body itself is transcendental, which is non-different from his soul. So we even saw descriptions related to this aspect in our previous Friday session when we studied the Ishopanishad mantras, mantras 8 and 9. So such is the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. And these are also some further descriptions are also available in Gita chapter 15 about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Person or Purushottam. So though we are originally parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, meaning we are originally spirit souls, our condition became degraded to this extent because we forgot our original identity, and at present we are influenced by this material contamination. So that's why it's stated here that matter is ignorance of this spiritual existence. We ourselves have forgotten about our eternal spiritual nature. So that's why we have been encased within this material body. So first of all, we should understand our original identity, and then we can reawaken our dormant Krishna consciousness and develop the desire to be always engaged in devotional service of the Supreme Lord. But for that, we have to follow the injunctions of the authentic scriptures like Gita and Bhagavatam. So the distinction between all these different types of energy are only applied to us because we will always remain subservient to the Supreme Lord. But these distinctions do not apply to him because he himself is the source. We are being influenced by all these different types of energies. Like though we originally belong to the superior spiritual energy of the Lord, but our present condition is such that we are like trapped between the material energy and the spiritual energy. So that is our condition, and it will always be like that because the Supreme Lord, being the source of all the different types of energy, he can utilize the different types of energies as he wishes. But that is not the case with us. We are always subservient to this influence of this material energy. So how do we transcend or liberate ourselves from the influence of the material energy? Lord Krishna himself has given the solution in Gita 7.14, where he says, Daivi Isha Gunamai Mamaya Durtaya Mameveye Prapatyanti Maya Metam Tanantite. Those who surrender to Lord Krishna can easily cross over this influence of his powerful material energy. So when we become enlightened by this spiritual aspect, by being engaged in devotional service, then we may become as intelligent. Of course, here it is stated regarding the status of Paramahamsa, but for any devotee, even to become a neophyte devotee itself, or a Madhyama Adhikari itself, is something great. But the status of a Paramahamsa itself is the topmost of all the other ashramas, because as we know, in the Varna ashrama system, there are the 4 Varnas and 4 ashramas. The 4 ashramas are Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa. So the Sannyasa ashrama is regarded as the topmost in devotional service. But even within the Sannyasa ashrama, there are 4 divisions. The lowest one is Kutichaka, then Baudaka, Parivrajaka and Paramamsa. So Kutichaka is like the neophyte sannyasi who has just started. Then Baudaka is slightly more advanced, or the intermediate. Parivrajaka is the sannyasi who is a bit more advanced, and he's very often involved in a lot of preaching activities. So he's known as Parivrajaka Acharya. So beyond that, after a certain stage, the Paramahamsa, of course, the Paramahamsa is also able to engage in a lot of preaching activities. But once the sannyasi attains Paramahamsa stage, he is like more often engaged in isolation. So compared to Paramahamsa, the Parivrajaka Acharya is always more involved in preaching activities. So the Paramahamsa is the topmost status in the topmost ashrama of sannyasa. Text 3. The citizens of Dwaraka, having heard that sound which threatens fear personified in the material world, began to run towards him fast, just to have a long desired audience with the Lord, who is the protector of all devotees. So even in Gita chapter 1, there are descriptions about how the Kauravas, especially Duryodhana, who was boasting about the superiority of his army, their hearts were all shattered after hearing the sounds of the conch shells of Lord Krishna and also the Pandavas. So even in the beginning, their hearts were shattered, even despite the fact that Duryodhana was actually trying to boast of the superiority of his army. And then first Bhishma Pitamaha started to blow his conch shell, followed by Lord Krishna and the Pandavas. But only when Lord Krishna and Pandavas blew the conch shell, the hearts of the Kauravas were completely shattered after hearing that sound. So, as described in Gita, similar description is also given here, having heard that sound which threatens fear personified in the material world. As already explained, the citizens of Dwarka who lived at the time of Lord Krishna's presence there were all liberated souls who descended there along with the Lord as entourage. All were very anxious to have an audience with the Lord, although because of spiritual contact, they were never separated from the Lord. Just as the gopis at Vrindavana used to think of Krishna while he was away from the village for cow herding engagements, The citizens of Dwarka were all immersed in thought of the Lord while he was away from Dwarka to attend the battle of Kurukshetra. Some distinguished fiction writer in Bengal concluded that the Krishna of Vrindavana, that of Mathura, and that of Dwarka were different personalities. Historically, there's no truth in this conclusion. The Krishna of Kurukshetra and the Krishna of Dwarka are one and the same personality. So here, Prabhupada is mentioning about this fiction writer, and though such fiction writers are the ones who get assignments to write movie scripts nowadays, even for the serials. And if we are going to depend on cinema and serials to gain spiritual knowledge, so we'll end up being misled by all these speculators. The citizens of Dwarka were thus in a state of melancholy due to the Lord's absence from the transcendental city, as much as we are put in a state of melancholy at night because of the absence of the sun. The sound heralded by Lord Krishna was something like the heralding of the sunrise in the morning. So all the citizens of Dwarka awoke from a state of slumber because of the sunrise of Krishna, and they all hastened towards him just to have an audience. The devotees of the Lord know no one else as protector. This sound of the Lord is identical with the Lord, as we have tried to explain by the non-dual position of the Lord. So this non-dual aspect should not be misunderstood as what is being propagated by the other schools of thought. This non-dual aspect applies only to the Supreme Lord. Only the Supreme Lord is not different from his body and his name, fame, name, form, pastimes, and other paraphernalia. This distinct quality applies only to the Supreme Lord. Like for us, we have the distinction between our material body and also our soul. Even for our material body, we have the gross body and subtle body. But there's no such distinctions for the Supreme Lord. So that is the transcendental quality of the Supreme Lord compared to us. The material existence of our present status is full of fear. Out of the 4 problems of material existence, namely the food problem, the shelter problem, the fear problem, and the mating problem. The fear problem gives us more trouble than the others. We are always fearful due to our ignorance of the next problem. The whole material existence is full of problems, and thus the fear problem is always prominent. This is due to our association with the illusory energy of the Lord known as Maya or external energy, yet all fear is vanished as soon as there is the sound of the Lord represented by his holy name, as it was sounded by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the following 16 words. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, Lord Krishna has mentioned in the Gita that those who surrender to him can easily resist or cross over the influence of the material energy. So only due to being subservient or being dominated by the material energy, that is the main cause for all our problems. And as long as we live in Maya without trying to develop our dormant Krishna consciousness, we'll only be wasting our existence in this human form of life, just like animals. So we'll only be engaged in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. However, due to the non-dual characteristic of the Supreme Lord, he is non-different from his other aspects. Like there's no difference between the Supreme Lord's soul and body, and there's no difference between his name, form, and name, form, pastimes, and other paraphernalia. And therefore, we can always enjoy his association simply by chanting his holy name which is non-different from him. And we can also enjoy his association by studying the scriptures like Gita and Bhagavatam, because those are also the literary incarnations, the literary forms of the Supreme Lord. So it's not that we always have to wait until we get liberated from this material world to enjoy the personal association of the Supreme Lord. We can easily enjoy his association by following the simple practices as mentioned by our acharyas, and also as given in as mentioned in the scriptures like the Navaveda Bhakti, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Padasivanam, Archanam Vandanam Jasyam, Sakyam Atmanivedam. So out of the 9 processes, simply Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, even these 3 are good enough, because when we are chanting, we are also hearing the transcendental sound of the holy name. And also by studying scriptures, that will also help to improve our remembrance or smaranam. So simply by being engaged in Shravanam, Kirtanam, automatically smaranam will also improve. And that is the single most important criterion that has been emphasized by Lord Krishna himself in Gita 8.5, where he says, Antakale chamame vasmaran muktva kalevaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nashtiyatra samsaya. So in that verse, Lord Krishna says that those who remember Lord Krishna at the time of passing away, they will attain the supreme abode. So that being the single most important criteria to liberate ourselves from this material world, we should really be always intensifying our sadhana in such a way that we engage more in Shravanam and Kirtanam, and by doing so, we can also improve our Smaranam, or the remembrance, by always remembering the Supreme Lord. We can take advantage of these sounds and be free from all threatening problems of material existence. So as long as we enjoy the association of the Supreme Lord by being engaged in chanting, we can take shelter in under the holy name by engaging in more rounds of chanting. We can also study the scriptures to remember the Supreme Lord even more, because even the pastimes of the Supreme Lord are non-different from him. The Lord's name, forms, and pastimes are non-different from him. So even by studying scriptures, by devoting more time for studying the scriptures, or even by listening to lectures, we can even increase our remembrance of the Supreme Lord. Text 4 and 5. The citizens arrived before the Lord with their respective presentations, offering them to the fully satisfied and self-sufficient one, who by his own potency incessantly supplies others. These presentations were like the offering of a lamp to the sun. Yet the citizens began to speak in ecstatic language to receive the Lord, just as gods welcome their guardian and father. The Supreme Lord himself is the supplier of everything, because everything emanates from him, as mentioned by Lord Krishna in Gita 10.8, Aham Sarvasya Prabho. Everything emanates from him, everything originates from him. So what can we actually give him to please him? We cannot be giving all these material presentations to satisfy him, because everything is a product of his energy. The Supreme Lord Krishna is described herein as Atmarama. He is self-sufficient, and there's no need for him to seek happiness from anything beyond himself. He is self-sufficient because his very transcendental existence is total bliss. He is eternally existent, he is all cognizant and all blissful. Sachidananda Vigraha, as mentioned in Brahma Samhita 5.1. Therefore, any presentation, however valuable it may be, is not needed by him. But still, because he is the well-wisher for one and all, he accepts from everyone everything that is offered to him in pure devotional service. It is not that he is in want for such things, because the things are themselves generated from his energy. So nothing is can be created by us, though the so-called modern scientists claim to have discovered so many things. Everything in this material world is just a product which has been generated by so many permutations and combinations of the 24 raw ingredients, the Mahatattva elements. So whatever we see in this material world are just combinations of the 24 elements. So even these elements, the raw ingredients, are byproducts of the Supreme Lord's material energy. So whatever is that is being created under the pretext of so-called discovery by all these modern scientists are also produced using the raw materials which originated from the Supreme Lord's material energy. So just because they do not want to acknowledge the existence of the Supreme Lord, in fact, they do not want to give credit to the supplier of all these raw materials. So they deny the existence of the Supreme Lord. And then they say that there's no God, everything comes from nature. But those intelligent people don't understand that even this material nature is merely a byproduct of Krishna's material energy, which is his Ekapada Vibhuti, just 1/4 of his total energy. So nothing can be created without Krishna's material energy. The comparison is made herein that making offerings to the Lord is something like offering a lamp in the worship of the sun god. Anything fiery and illuminating is but an emanation of the energy of the sun, and yet to worship the sun god, it is necessary to offer him a lamp. In the worship of the sun, there is some sort of demand made by the worshipper, but in the case of devotional service to the Lord, there is no question of demand from either side. It is all a sign of pure love and affection between the Lord and the devotee. So since everything is created using the energy of the Supreme Lord, even if we consider the various types of paraphernalia that we use in our, let's say, deity worship activities, all the different paraphernalia that we use, they are also products of Lord Krishna's material energy. So we cannot really please the Supreme Lord simply by giving him material objects that have been created from his own energy. That's why in Gita 9.26, Lord Krishna says, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam Yome Bhaktya Prayatati Taram Bhakti Upatam Ashname Prayatatmanaha. In this verse, the word bhakti is repeated more than once to emphasize the importance of the devotional aspect. The Lord is willing to accept the various offerings only when it is presented to him with enough love and devotion. So merely by offering him material objects, that will not be enough to please him. So what he's really looking for is our love and devotion more than the material objects itself. And also it is stated here that in the worship of the sun, there is some sort of demand made by the worshipper. But in the case of devotional service to the Lord, there is no question of demand from either side. It is all a sign of pure love and affection between the Lord and the devotee. So when we consider demigod worship, always there will be some material benediction that is being the objective of that demigod worship. People engage in demigod worship, different demigods for different purposes, and Krishna himself says that even those benedictions which seem like they are being awarded by the demigods, even those require the sanction of Krishna. So nothing happens without the sanction of Krishna. Even if we pray to the sun god or any other demigods for some material benediction, still it is only the Supreme Lord who makes that happen. So the demigods merely deliver what is being supplied by the Supreme Lord. So that's why it is even more important to focus on worshipping the Supreme Lord, because merely by aiming for material benedictions will not end our problems. Though we have our material needs, we should only if we aim to fulfill our bare necessities of life, that's fine. But it's completely foolish to further entangle ourselves by aiming for more and more material benedictions, because those are all temporary and they will only bind us further in this material world, being the cause for further bondage. So only devotional service could liberate us, and that's why we should focus on performing more devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And it is not that we are going to neglect or disrespect the demigods, because according to Narada Muni, there is a verse spoken by Narada Muni in the 4th canto, in the last chapter of the 4th canto, in his instruction to the Prachetas. Yata taru mula nisechanayana tripyanti tatskanta bujopashaka pranopahara chayatendriyanam tataiva sarvanam achyutedya. So in that verse, Narada Muni simply says that just like watering the roots, just like watering the roots of a plant nourishes the entire plant or tree, just like supplying food to the stomach nourishes the entire body, worshipping Lord Achyuta or the Supreme Lord satisfies all the demigods. So normally we see that those who are engaged in demigod worship, normally they are after some material benediction, and therefore they worship a certain demigod. And just because we are focusing on Krishna consciousness, and just because we always focus on chanting Lord Krishna's holy names, it is not uncommon to see others accusing us to be fanatics or sentimentalists, but we are merely following the instruction of Narada Muni. For those who are engaged in demigod worship, when they have certain material goals, they engage in worshipping particular demigods, and there are many perceptions regarding the number of demigods which are there. But of course, we know that there are many demigods, though the number is always a subject of dispute. But even that exact number is there in our scriptures. So we are following the instruction of Narada Muni, and we are actually satisfying all the demigods without discrimination, simply by focusing on the Supreme Lord Krishna. But for those who accuse us as being fanatics, they merely focus on certain demigods, and by focusing only on certain demigods, they themselves are abandoning others. So it is much wiser to follow the instruction of one of our foremost Acharya, Narada Muni, in our Sampradaya. And by focusing on the Supreme Lord, compared to demigod worship, which is often materially motivated, focusing on the Supreme Lord will further improve our consciousness in such a way that it further reawakens our devotional service, and it would gradually liberate us from this material bondage. But if we are only going to be focused on gaining more and more material benedictions, that would further entangle us in this material world, meaning more further entanglement in the cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. So being trapped in such a condition, even after getting this human form of life, is the most unfortunate thing that could happen to anybody. So that is why we should focus more on devotional service and love for the Supreme Lord, apart from we should focus on devotional service to the Supreme Lord, and not look at more and more material benedictions. The Lord is the Supreme Father of all living beings, and therefore those who are conscious of this vital relation with God can make filial demands from the Father, and the Father is pleased to supply the demands of such obedient sons without bargaining. The Lord is just like the desire tree, and from him everyone can have everything by the causeless mercy of the Lord. As the Supreme Father, the Lord, however, does not supply to a pure devotee what is considered to be a barrier to the discharge of devotional service. Those who are engaged in the devotional service of the Lord can rise to the position of unalloyed devotional service by his transcendental attraction. So in the Gita, there are also several verses where Krishna says that he is the Supreme Father, like in chapter 9 and chapter 14. Like in chapter 9, there's this verse, I think it's 9.17, Pita Asya Jagato. So the Supreme Lord is actually the father of even Lord Brahma. And also in chapter 14, the third verse, even in that verse, Lord Krishna says that he is the Supreme Father who impregnates the Mahat Brahma, or the material nature. So those who are obedient to the Supreme Father and his instructions will always get the ultimate benefit, meaning liberation from this material world. And there are stages to get there. Even for those who are who may deny the existence of God, if their dormant Krishna consciousness is gets awakened, even they can gradually progress towards eliminating all their material desires. And it is only because of the influence of material nature, the material energy, which has been acknowledged by Lord Krishna himself. That's why in Gita 7.14, he himself says that the influence of the material energy is so strong. However, those who surrender to him, who is himself the source of that material energy, so then we can cross over or transcend the influence of the material energy. And the Supreme Lord does not discriminate. All the souls are his children. However, only those children who are obedient can attain the mercy of the Supreme Lord, because he does not discriminate, but it is the onus is on us to to move towards him. Otherwise, he will always be happy to let us enjoy ourselves as we perceive in the form of conditioned souls. We are thinking that we are enjoying in this material world, but the opposite is true. It is the material nature that is exploiting us. So this is also mentioned in Gita chapter 7. So only devotional service could enlighten us about this truth, that though we are thinking that we are exploiting this material nature and we are enjoying in this material world, the exact opposite is true, because we are performing all these fruitive activities and we are getting further and further entangled in this material bondage. So that actually degrades our condition further. And if we do not act in according to Krishna consciousness, we can never awaken the ourselves to spiritual inquiry, and we can never even think about being engaged in devotional service, which is the true remedy to all our material disease. So the Supreme Lord does not discriminate. He is always there to grant us what we wish for. And if we wish to regain his eternal association in the spiritual world, and if we show him that we are truly sincere about being liberated from this material bondage, he will always be happy to help us. But the onus is on us, because we ourselves are the ones who ask for this miserable condition, thinking that we could enjoy in this material world. Of course, using this human form of life, there is a certain advantage to actually engage in spiritual inquiry and inquire about our present condition, about why we are suffering. But those who do not even acknowledge the fact that they are actually suffering, then they'll only be further entangled. Text 6. The citizens said, "O Lord, you are worshipped by all demigods like Brahma, the four sanas, and even the king of heaven. You are the ultimate rest for those who are really aspiring to achieve the highest benefit of life. You are the supreme transcendental Lord, and inevitable time cannot exert its influence upon you." The Supreme Lord is Sri Krishna, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Samhita, and other authorized Vedic literatures. No one is equal to or greater than him, and that is the verdict of all scriptures. The influence of time and space is exerted upon the dependent living entities, who are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. The living entities are predominated Brahma. We ourselves are Jiva Brahma, and the Supreme Lord is Para Brahma, and the material nature is known as Mad Brahma, whereas the Supreme Lord is the predominating absolute, Para Brahma, Supreme Brahman. As soon as we forget this clear fact, we are at once in illusion, and thus we are put into threefold miseries, as one is put into dense darkness. The clear consciousness of the cognizant living being is God consciousness, in which one bows down unto him in all circumstances. So the only solution to liberate ourselves from this material misery is that we have to always be engaged in devotional service. But devotional service does not mean that we should perform deity worship alone for like 24/7. We can always remain in remembrance of the Supreme Lord. We can always develop that consciousness which enables us to remember the Supreme Lord by more and more chanting and listening. So that itself enables us to remain associated to the Supreme Lord, regardless of whether we are doing our material duties. Text 7. O Creator of the universe, you are our mother, well-wisher, Lord, Father, spiritual master, and worshipable deity. By following in your footsteps, we have become successful in every respect. We pray, therefore, that you continue to bless us with your mercy. So we can clearly see from here that in this chapter, Lord Krishna has actually arrived in Dwaraka, and he is surrounded by the inhabitants of Dwaraka. In the previous chapter, we saw that the residents of Hastinapura, they were also surrounding the Supreme Lord when he was about to depart from Hastinapura. So in both cases, we can see that these great souls, these exalted devotees, they were all conversing about the various aspects and characteristics, the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. So even from all these detailed descriptions about the Supreme Lord, which are being uttered by these devotees in Hastinapura and Dwaraka, we can clearly see that it is this characteristic of these devotees which has actually made them qualified to enjoy the personal association of the Supreme Lord in this material world when he was present in this material world. So we can see the kind of vivid descriptions that these devotees are giving. So that shows the depth of understanding that these devotees have about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. So that's why Lord Krishna himself said in Gita 4.9, Janma karma chame divyam evam yo viti tattvata tyaktva devam punarjanma neti mameti so Arjuna. So first of all, we should discover our original identity. By doing so, we can also reignite or reawaken the dormant Krishna consciousness within ourselves, and we will also begin to understand about the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. And when we have in-depth understanding about the Supreme Lord, that makes us qualified to regain the association of the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world. So even the residents of Hastinapura and Dwaraka, they were also well-versed about the transcendental characteristics of the Supreme Lord. So they are able to speak about the various attributes of the Supreme Lord in great detail, like in depth. The all-good personality of Godhead, being the creator of the universe, also plans for the good of all good living beings. The good living beings are advised by the Lord to follow his good advice, and by doing so, they become successful in all spheres of life. There's no need to worship any deity but the Lord. The Lord is all-powerful, and if he is satisfied by our obedience unto his lotus feet, he is competent to bestow upon us all kinds of blessings for the successful execution of both our material and spiritual lives. So this has been the main verdict of Bhagavad Gita itself. The good living beings are advised by the Lord to follow his good advice. Though Arjuna was reluctant to fight in the beginning, in the end, the Supreme Lord himself was merciful enough to give so much explanation to all of Arjuna's inquiries. So the Supreme Lord did not actually force Arjuna to fight as being what is being propagated by so many self-proclaimed rationalists and atheists. So the Supreme Lord gave so much explanation, and even after giving so much explanation, then the Lord even gave Arjuna the choice for him to decide in 18.63. The Lord said that I've told you everything that you need to know, because that was Arjuna's request in Gita 2.7. Arjuna himself surrendered as a disciple because he himself admitted that he is unable to decide what is good for him. He was confused about his dharma. He was unable to decide what he should do to fulfill his dharma, and therefore he surrendered to Lord Krishna as a disciple in Gita 2.7. Then in 18.63, Lord Krishna says that I've revealed to you all the important things that you need to know. So now you decide for yourself. And then in 18.73, we know that Arjuna himself says, Arjuna himself said that all his illusions have been dispelled and he has become more firmly resolved about his duty. So the Lord provides good advice, and by following his instructions, we can become successful, as revealed from the verdict of the Gita. And it is also stated that there is no need to worship any deity but the Lord, because simply by worshipping the Supreme Lord, we can satisfy all the various demigods without discrimination. For attaining spiritual existence, the human form is a chance for all to understand our eternal relation with God. So only we who have been blessed with this human form of life can engage in spiritual inquiry in this middle planet. Of course, in the upper planets, there are more exalted devotees of the Supreme Lord, but we ourselves, we have this distinct advantage through our human form of life, that though we are now in this middle planet, we are still having that advantage that is as good as which is being held by those exalted devotees in the upper planetary systems. So that is the unique feature of this human form of life. We are able to engage in spiritual inquiry. If we waste this human form of life, then of course we are only going to prove to Krishna that we do not deserve this prestigious apartment. Srila Prabhupada often uses the analogy of an apartment to describe the 84 lakh species of material bodies. So Lord Krishna has been merciful enough to give us this prestigious apartment of the human form of life. So the onus is on us to fully utilize this human form of life to develop our spiritual inquiry and fully engage in devotional service. Otherwise, we only deserve the less prestigious and more dilapidated apartments like other forms of life. Because if we are not going to use this opportunity for spiritual inquiry, then we only deserve those other forms of life. Our relation with him is eternal. It can neither be broken nor vanquished. It may be forgotten for the time being, but it can be revived also by the grace of the Lord if we follow his injunctions, which are revealed in the scriptures of all times and places. So even in the Chatusloki Gita, in verses 10.10 and 10.11, Lord Krishna says about how he is willing to help those devotees who are intensely engaged in devotional service. He will help to destroy the ignorance of such devotees and further reawaken their dormant Krishna consciousness. Something similar has also been mentioned by Lord Krishna in 9.22, where he says, Ananyas Chintayanto Vam, Ye Jana Paripaste, Tesham Nityavyuktanam, Yoga Kshemam Vam Yam. The Supreme Lord will always help us by preserving whatever advantages that we have that are ideal for devotional service, and he also further supplies what we lack in when it comes to progressing further in devotional service. So the Supreme Lord is always willing to help as long as we ourselves are sincere about being engaged in devotional service. Text. Oh, it is our good luck that we have come again today under your protection by your presence, for your lordship rarely visits even the dungeons of heaven. Now it is possible for us to look into your smiling face, which is full of affectionate glances. We can now see your transcendental form, full of all auspiciousness. The Lord, in his eternal personal form, can be seen only by the pure devotees. The Lord is never impersonal, but he is the supreme absolute personality of Godhead, possible to be visited by devotional service face to face, which is impossible to be done even by the residents of higher planets. When Brahmaji and other demigods want to this ocean of milk and the Sweta planet are the replica of Vaikuntha Loka within the universe. Neither Brahmaji nor the demigods like Indra can enter into this island of Sweta, but they can stand on the shore of the ocean of milk and transmit their message to Lord Vishnu, known as Shirotukashai Vishnu. Therefore, the Lord is rarely seen by them, but the inhabitants of Dwarka, because of their being pure devotees without any tinge of the material contamination of fruitive activities and empiric philosophical speculation, can see him face to face by the grace of the Lord. This is the original state of the living entities and can be attained by reviving our natural and constitutional state of life, which is discovered by devotional service only. So here's the description about the Shweta Dvipa. So this abode is actually the abode of Vishnu in the material world, and we know that this is what was granted to Dhruva Maharaj as Dhruvaloka. So the Supreme Lord is willing to reciprocate to the devotional service performed by Dhruva Maharaj when he was engaged in chanting the mantra of Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So even by chanting the holy name of the Supreme Lord, he was developing that personal association with the Supreme Lord, because the Supreme Lord is non-different from his name, form, and pastimes. So in many episodes from the Bhagavatam, we can clearly see how the devotees who have always been engaged in Bhakti Yoga, they have actually gained such exalted positions that are not even attainable by Brahma or other demigods in the upper planetary systems. So such is the exaltedness of Bhakti Yoga. And even in by performing Bhakti Yoga, the devotees always develop the personal association with the Supreme Lord, because they are always attracted to the personal form of the Supreme Lord. So when we are chanting, we are associating with the holy name, which is non-different from the Supreme Lord. Even when we are hearing or studying the scriptures, when we are hearing lectures or studying scriptures, even then we are associating with the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, which are again non-different from the Supreme Lord. So when we are engaged in deity worship, also we are associating with the personal form of the Lord. So that is the topmost form which results in the full Bhagavan realization. Unlike what is being propagated by other schools of thought, they are actually they are like hell-bent on reversing the process. They are always saying that the impersonal form is the topmost level, though it has been clearly emphasized in all the authentic scriptures that the personal form is what the interactions between the Supreme Lord and the devotees. We can clearly see that those who have been always engaged in Bhakti Yoga, they have been able to attain success in all circumstances compared to those who have been merely practicing other forms of yoga. Like though Dhyana Yoga is often regarded as a more challenging and it is often regarded as the topmost level of worship. But what truly matters is that no matter which which type of yoga system that we follow, it should all culminate in developing Bhakti Yoga itself. So that should be the topmost goal. But if that doesn't happen, then it is completely useless to follow whatever challenging type of yoga system, which may appear like very challenging to perform. Still, what truly matters is that it should rekindle the spirit of devotional service. It should culminate in Bhakti Yoga only. So that's why our acharyas have been merciful enough to show us the way towards achieving Bhakti Yoga by taking the path of Bhakti Yoga itself. So that is why Lord Krishna himself ends chapter 6 of the Gita, though chapter 6 is actually meant to talk about Dhyana Yoga. We can clearly see that Lord Krishna gives so much explanation about Dhyana Yoga only for Arjuna to say that it is that system of yoga is extremely difficult to follow. So this was Arjuna, who was such an exalted devotee, who was talking to Lord Krishna in Dwapara Yoga. So even if such a system was regarded as difficult by such an exalted person like Arjuna, so how is it possible for us to be engaged in such challenging systems? So that's why our acharyas have been merciful enough to give us this easy process of Bhakti Yoga by simply chanting the holy name of the Supreme Lord. So even by associating with the holy name, we are also actually developing our personal association with the Supreme Lord, because the Lord is non-different from his holy name. And even by practicing all the other Navaveda Bhakti processes of Bhakti Yoga, we can also be further engaged in the association of the personal form of the Supreme Lord. So that is the advantage of Bhakti Yoga. O lotus-eyed Lord, whenever you go away to Mathura, Vrindavana, or Hastinapura to meet your friends and relatives, every moment of your absence seems like millions of years. O infallible one, at that time our eyes become useless, as if bereft of sun. We are all proud of our material senses for making experiments to determine the existence of God. But we forget that our senses are not absolute by themselves. They can only act under certain conditions, for example, our eyes. As long as the sunshine is there, our eyes are useful to a certain extent. But in that absence of sunshine, the eyes are useless. Lord Sri Krishna, being the primal Lord, the supreme truth, is compared to the sun. Without him, all our knowledge is either false or partial. The opposite of the sun is darkness, and similarly, the opposite of Krishna is Maya or illusion. The devotees of the Lord can see everything in true perspective due to the light disseminated by Lord Krishna. By the grace of the Lord, the pure devotee cannot be in the darkness of ignorance. Therefore, it is necessary that we must always be in the sight of Lord Krishna, so that we can see both ourselves and the Lord with these different energies. As we cannot see anything in the absence of the sun, so also we cannot see anything, including our own self, without the factual presence of the Lord. Without him, all our knowledge is covered by illusion. So when you talk about vision, even for spiritual vision, spiritual knowledge is required. though we have been blessed with this human form of life, though we all have the ability to engage in spiritual inquiry, not all of us do it. So it can be clearly seen from the example of the Kauravas and Pandavas. The Kauravas, just like Dhritarashtra, who was blind since birth, even his sons were blind because they were actually spiritually blind. So that is why the mercy of Krishna is particularly important. Though we have all our material senses, as long as we do not get enlightened by spiritual knowledge, we will still remain in ignorance. So when we don't have enough sunshine, we are going to remain in darkness. But from a spiritual perspective, this darkness is often equated to ignorance. So only the Supreme Lord could help us as the sun who gives us this spiritual enlightenment to illuminate our darkness of ignorance. Oh Master, if you live abroad all the time, then we cannot look at your attractive face whose smiles vanquish all our sufferings. How can we exist without your presence? Upon hearing their speeches, the Lord, who is very kind to the citizens and the devotees, entered the city of Dwarka and acknowledged all their greetings by casting his transcendental glance over them. Lord Krishna's attraction is so powerful that once being attracted by him, one cannot tolerate separation from him. Why is this so? Because we are all eternally related with him, as the sun rays are eternally related with the sun disk. The sun rays are molecular parts of the solar radiation. Thus, the sun rays and the sun cannot be separated. The separation by the cloud is temporary and artificial, and as soon as the cloud is cleared, the sun rays again display their natural effulgence in the presence of the sun. So the sun is always present. It's just that when it's blocked by cloud, it seems like the sun is not present, but the sun is always present during the daytime. It's just that when the sun rays are blocked by a cloud, we are unable to see the sun. Similarly, our problem is that our spiritual vision is blocked by the cloud of Maya. But as soon as this cloud gets cleared, we will be able to see the sun, the supreme sun, that is Lord Krishna, and that will be the biggest remedy to our material disease. Similarly, the living entities for molecular parts of the whole spirit are separated from the Lord by the artificial covering of Maya, illusory energy. This illusory energy, or the curtain of Maya, has to be removed, and when it is so done, the living entity can see the Lord face to face, and all his miseries are at once removed. Every one of us wants to remove the miseries of life, but we do not know how to do it. The solution is given here, and it rests on us to assimilate it or not. So it is entirely up to us. First of all, we should be able to acknowledge that we are suffering, that we are trapped in this Dukkalayam Ashasutam, place of misery. If we cannot even realize that, then we really cannot progress towards the solution. First, we should identify and acknowledge the problem. So for those who are unable to even acknowledge the fact that they are suffering in this place of misery, so there's no chance for them to progress towards the solution. But for us, even as neophyte devotees, actually, we have been able to at least identify our problem. We acknowledge the fact that we are suffering in this place of misery. So by the mercy of our acharyas, with the help of Guru Sadhu Shastra, we can gradually progress towards the solution. So the onus is entirely on us. So that's all for today. Thank you for attending. Any questions?
I think Baba, everything is okay.
Prabhu,
Yeah.
Prabhu, what is the meaning of denizens? Denizens.
They are the residents of heaven.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Yeah. Den isn't like a den. Den is like a place. So all those who are there in the, it's used for the residents of the upper planetary system. Mhm. Okay. So thank you, Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, can we get the recording, Prabhu? Because I entered late. I came in late.
Yeah, it is live streaming. You can watch it on YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.